if we are holy and if we are obedient and we uphold what God has given us, he is with us. And we are with him. It's amazing. We always focus on the details that we should not be focusing on. Why? Once again, notice verse 27 here in Ezekiel 37. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Did you see that? That's the point. That's the point. Where everyone else outside of God's people in those times had their temples. They saw this in Egypt, didn't they? In fact, they built some of those temples because they were the ones making the bricks, remember? Where they saw that everywhere else, everyone else had a temple erected for their false god, for their idols. Israel was the only one who had a movable one. Israel was the one that had one that traveled with them. And more importantly, Israel always set up their tents when they would stop and they would make camp. They would build the temple and then they would build the tabernacle. And after building the tabernacle, all 12 tribes would be around the tabernacle, right? 4 tribes on each side. The presence of God was in the center or the heart of Israel, right? So this is why when we see this, we talk about God showing them that he is going to be the heart. He is going to be the one who is at the center. He should be our center. He should be our reason for being. Okay? Yes, sir.
I have a question, and I know nobody has the answer, but it puzzles me to this extent. The tabernacle, all that the Jews had in the temple and everything, according to them, God dwells.
Mm-hmm.
If it's important for us, we should have it here.
Mm-hmm.
So, where is it? To this day, nobody knows where that day. Imagine it's here, over there, or whatever. But where is that where the tabernacle where God dwelled when the Jews were there?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a question. Where is that?
Well, again, God got rid of it. We have to understand that when Jesus was crucified, he abolished everything. Take, for example, okay, can you have a temple without the curtain? No. And yet it split. AD 70, most of the things that were there were burned. In fact, everything was burned. And one of the most important things that were burned in the temple were the records of the genealogy of the Levites. Therefore, upon burning those records, there's no way anyone could claim and prove they were a Levite. And without Levites, what goes out the window? Sacrifices, right? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right. So what I see, the way the question that Brother Joe points out, what the key that I got from is, if it were important. Well, the fact that God destroyed it all, he uprooted it and he removed it shows it's not. It's already served its purpose. It's already served its purpose. The Christ has already come, and the church, which is the temple of God, as we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and in chapter 6, is us, right? We are the temple of God. Therefore, because it's all spiritual in nature, there's no longer need for any of those. But let's move on because we have a few minutes, right? So we go on then and notice how Gog and Magog are shown here, right? In this case. Now, why is Gog and Magog important? Why is Gog and Magog important? Armageddon, right? The Battle of Armageddon. What do we think about when we hear the Battle of Armageddon? The end of times. But is that what Armageddon represents? No. And that's what's important to see, that Ezekiel brings it up too, doesn't he? Notice that Ezekiel chapter 38 brings up the battle of Gog and Magog, And what he's doing is he's once again showing how the enemies of the people of God were going to be dealt with, how they were going to be dealt with. In the book of John, right, we see the same thing in chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. Who is bound in chapter 20 of Revelation? I'll give you a hint. He's bound symbolically for 1,000 years. The devil. Well, what is the devil to Christians? He's our ally? He's our frenemy? Sadly, for some Christians, he may be, right? But no. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 tells us that he is what? He's our adversary, right? He is a roaring lion who is seeking to devour us. He's our adversary, okay? He is our enemy. Well, in chapter 20 of Revelation, the Bible shows us God dealing with the church's adversary. The Bible shows us God defeating our enemy, right? Now, and I learned something not too long ago, which is very important for us to understand. Satan, brethren, is the enemy of the church. But Satan cannot be the enemy of God. Why is that?
One thing is possible. He's not there no more. He knows he's been defeated.
Okay.
And the only reason he's the enemy of the church is because he's trying to destroy the church. So that's where the kingdom of God is.
Okay. Brother Brown? God has no equal, brethren. God has no equal. In order for Satan to be God's arch enemy or enemy, he has to be at the same level as him. God has no equal. This is why God has no enemies. Therefore, since Satan knows he cannot defeat God, notice that in the book of Job, Satan clearly shows that he is not God's enemy. Why? Because even the devil submits to the will of God. That's incredible. Think about that. You can take away, but do not touch his health. First time, Satan complies. Yes, you're hearing me right. Satan obeyed. Okay? Second time, okay, you can touch his flesh, but do not touch his life. Did Satan comply? Yes, he did. That's twice where we read in the Bible, in the book of Job, where the devil himself obeys and submits to the will of God. If he's God's enemy, why would he then submit to his will? God has no equal, brethren. God has no equal. But yet, whom did Satan attack? Job, a godly man. In the book of Revelation, who does Satan always attack? The church, godly men and women. Well, this should be encouraging to us because that means that we can go toe-to-toe with the devil. That he is not necessarily greater than us. We are equal in strength. And because we are, Christ makes us stronger. That's what James chapter 4, verse 7 teaches us, doesn't it? Resist the devil. Well, you can't resist someone who's stronger than you, can you? But you can resist someone who is equal in force. You see that? But then James says, submit to God. Well, there's how we become stronger. There's our edge. And what is the devil going to do? And he will flee from you. So when we read about Gog and Magog, brethren, we are seeing that God is showing that he will take care of our enemies, that he will deal with those who oppose, who are adversaries, right, to his church, that he himself takes it personally when his children are being attacked unrighteously. Yes, sir.
If you don't believe that, that's small.
Yeah, I was going there, brother. You gotta stop looking at my notes, Joe. Yes, Paul, chapter 9, right? What did Jesus tell them? Read it for us, Brother Joe. Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. Please, brother. Yes, sir.
Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and had letters from him to the synagogue of Damascus, so that if he found any who were on the way, whether man or woman, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?
Now, notice what Christ is telling him. In verses 1 through 4, we see that he was looking for letters to persecute men and women who belong to the church, right? But Christ tells him, why are you persecuting me? God takes it personal, brethren. God takes it very personal. When we persecute one another, we are persecuting Christ himself. We got to be careful. You know, God does not take it well, and he will avenge. Romans chapter 12, right? Verse 19. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. He will take care of those who persecute his children. Thus, what we see there in Magog and Magog, right, both in Ezekiel and Revelation, we are seeing God avenging his children. We are seeing God taking matters into his own hands. Then Ezekiel and John are both shown a vision on a very high mountain. In Ezekiel chapter 40, we see that God begins to show Ezekiel the vision of his temple being restored, of the reconstruction of what his going to be. And of course, he's not showing him something that literally happened. He is giving him a glimpse of the future, right? He's giving him a glimpse of what God was going to do spiritually. Well, John, once again, in chapter 21, verses 9 through 10, is also shown the New Jerusalem, isn't he? He is seeing the New Jerusalem descending from the heavens. But notice that both prophets were taken to a very high mountain to see this. Well, brethren, a mountain, right, is usually in the Hebrew mind, in the Israelite mind, was synonymous to the throne of God. It was synonymous to being in the realm that belonged to God. Mountains are usually seen as majestic parts of the world, right? And therefore, the fact that these men are brought there, they're basically being shown that they are in the presence of God and that they are seeing things from the perspective of God, right? They're at a high mountain and they are seeing at the bottom, and they are seeing everything where there cannot be any confusion, or nothing can be missed from what is being shown. Once again, we continue. This thing broke again. We continue, and as we see once again that God is showing Ezekiel these types of things, like he is also doing with John, it's important to notice that in chapter 40 as well as in chapter 21, now it's a message of restoration. Now it's a message of hope, right? Now, thank you, brother, they are seeing a new city, aren't they? And remember how we said the last 15 chapters of Ezekiel are spiritual? Remember how we talked about how the last 15 chapters of Ezekiel are not talking about a literal restoration? Well, this is why putting it side by side with Revelation becomes so key. Because notice the parallels between the two. And neither one of them are talking about a physical, literal Jerusalem, are they? Because in Revelation chapter 21, verse 16, we see that both cities are measured. Now, question, if it is literal, why is it important to measure it? It was already there. Just needed to restore it. It's not like Jerusalem shrunk, right? Why is it important to measure it? Well, literally serves no purpose, does it? But what about spiritually?
To show us there's plenty of room for us.
Okay, to show us there's plenty of room for us. That's a good thought. I hadn't thought about that. But why else? Let me help you out. What do you use to measure? Measuring tape or a ruler? What word comes out of ruler? Rule. What's the point of a rule? Order. You see that? God was showing the boundaries. God was showing the order that he was establishing. Did you know that this is why Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is so important? And God created the heavens and the earth, and the world was what? Disordered. You know, those who try to combine evolution, and they call it a theistic evolution, right? Who try to claim that between chapter 1, verse 1 and chapter 1, verse 2, millions of years passed, right? No, that's not true. Because what God shows us is order. That he's a God of order. What God is showing us is how he began to measure so that he could set things in place. If you read every one of those days of creation, you're going to see the order that they're in is absolutely necessary. Without light, it makes no sense to bring forth earth, does it? There can be no vegetation without light. There can be no life without light. So light needed to go first. And then everything else, as they say, right, happened exactly in the day that it needed to happen. So when God shows this image of the cities being measured, he's showing that there's going to be order, that there's going to be a rule that needs to be followed. There are going to be boundaries, right, that we need to understand have to be set in place. Very quickly, brethren, we see that there are 12 gates with the names of Israel's tribes, both in the book of Revelation, like in the book of Ezekiel. But then we are seeing, finally, the river of healing waters in the book of Ezekiel, and in the book of Revelation is called the river of life. What did Jesus tell the woman at the well, at Jacob's well? That he could provide what? Life, right? He could provide living waters. Well, that word of living waters, brethren, when we read what the woman mentions or how she responds, we know she thought about it literally, because what she understood it to mean were rivers. She thought it to mean rivers, right? Because the river has a current that can easily be seen. It looks as if it were alive. You see that? But the key, brethren, is this. Both in Ezekiel and in Revelation, the idea that God is providing is a complete and total restoration. A complete and total salvation. Because both in Ezekiel and Revelation, the river heals, but the river also gives life everlasting. Hope. They both end on a note of hope. They both end with a promise of salvation. Even though both Ezekiel and John and Revelation start off with a gloom and gruesome image, right? It both ends in victory. They both end in teaching us, as we've already mentioned, that it begins, right, with sin, punishment of sin, repentance, but it ends with total restoration, right? The blessing of salvation. Thank you all, brethren. I will be putting this on our website this week if anybody wants them. If anyone has any questions I couldn't get to because of our time, please ask them to me now and we can definitely talk about them. Thank you all. May God bless you, each and every one of you.